I came home from burying my sister to find a silver BMW parked in my driveway. Not beside it. In it, right in the middle, angled like whoever owned it had decided my property was theirs now and didn't care who knew it. I stood there with dirt still caked under my nails from the cemetery and stared at that car like it was some kind of hallucination brought on by 3 days of no sleep and too much coffee. The front door was wide open. Music was playing inside, not soft music, loud music, the kind that vibrates through walls and makes your teeth ache. I heard laughter. I heard glasses clinking. I heard voices I didn't recognize, talking like they were at some kind of party. For a second I thought maybe grief had finally cracked me open and I was losing my mind, that I'd driven to the wrong house. That exhaustion had scrambled my brain, and I was standing in some stranger's driveway about to make a fool of myself. But no, the mailbox had my name on it. The cracked lamppost I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months was still cracked. The rosebush my late wife planted 20 years ago was still there, struggling through another Oklahoma summer. This was my house, and someone was inside it. I walked up the steps slowly. My legs felt heavy. My chest felt tight. I could smell something cooking, garlic, butter. Someone was using my kitchen. I stepped through the front door and stopped. 3 people I'd never seen before in my life were sprawling across my furniture like they'd lived there for years. One of them, a woman with dark eyeliner and a nose ring, was going through my kitchen cabinets, pulling out plates. Another man, younger, maybe 25, was stretched out on the recliner my late wife used to sit in every Sunday morning with her crossword puzzle and her tea. And standing in the middle of my living room, holding a beer that came from my fridge, was a man maybe 30 years old, with slicked back hair, a gold watch that caught the light, and a smile that made my stomach turn. He looked up at me, and his smile widened, not warmly, just casually. Like I was the guest and he was doing me a favor by acknowledging me. "You must be William," he said. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of voice that's used to getting what it wants. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry and my brain was still trying to process what I was seeing. He stood up slow, brushing crumbs off his jeans, took a sip of my beer. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Your daughter's fiancé." That word hit me like a fist to the chest. Fiancé. My daughter Cassie hadn't mentioned any fiancé, hadn't mentioned a boyfriend, hadn't called me in 3 weeks, actually. Not since I told her Aunt Diane was getting worse and I didn't know how much time she had left. And now this stranger was standing in my living room, introducing himself like we were at some family barbecue and I'd just arrived late. I looked past him. The woman with the eyeliner was still rifling through my cabinets. The younger man had turned on my television and was flipping through channels with my remote. There were bags by the door. Suitcases, like they were moving in. My chest tightened. My hands started to shake, not from fear, from something older, something I hadn't felt in years. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. Raspier. Like I'd been screaming even though I hadn't said a word in hours. Ethan shrugged. Casual. Like I'd asked him about the weather. "Cassie didn't tell you?" "We're moving in, just temporarily. You know how it is. Rent's tough right now. The market's insane. We needed a place to crash for a bit and she said you had all this space." I blinked, tried to make sense of what he was saying. "Moving in," I repeated, into my house. He nodded like I'd just said something obvious. "Right, and Cassie's your daughter, so it works out. Family, helping family, you know?" I felt my hands curl into fists, my jaw clenched so hard, my teeth hurt. "This is my house," I said. "I didn't give anyone permission to move in." Ethan tilted his head like he was confused. "Well, yeah, but Cassie's your daughter." So technically, it's hers too, right? I mean, she grew up here. She's got just as much claim to it as you do. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. No, I said, my voice was harder now, steadier. She doesn't. My name is on the deed. I paid off the mortgage 23 years ago. This is my house, and you need to leave. The woman in the kitchen turned around. She looked at Ethan and raised an eyebrow. He's serious? She asked. Ethan sighed, set his beer down on my coffee table without a coaster, ran a hand through his hair like I was some stubborn child throwing a tantrum he didn't have time for. Look, William, he said. His voice was different now, patronizing, like he was talking to someone slow. I get it. You just lost your sister. You're emotional. You're grieving. But Cassie already gave us the keys. We talked about this. She said it was fine. She doesn't have the right to say it's fine, I said, because it's not her house. Ethan's smile faded just a little. Okay, he said slowly. I can see you're upset, so here's what we'll do. You've got options. You can figure it out. Stay with a friend for a few days until you cool off. Or I saw a storage unit place on Maple Street. They've got units with electricity. Some of them even have couches you could set up there for a bit. Give us some space. Then when you're thinking clearly, we can all sit down and talk like adults. I stared at him. I stared at this man I'd never met before in my life, standing in my living room, drinking my beer, telling me to go sleep in a storage unit so he could have my house, the house I had bought with my wife 30 years ago, the house where we raised our daughter, the house where my wife died in our bed upstairs because the cancer moved too fast and the hospice nurse said it was better for her to be home. The house where every corner held a memory this man would never understand and didn't care to. And he was telling me to leave. My voice came out low, quiet, dangerous. Big mistake, I said. Ethan's eyebrow went up. What? You just made a big mistake? I repeated. He laughed, actually laughed. But it sounded different now, uncertain, like he'd just noticed something in my eyes he didn't like and wasn't sure how to process it. Whatever, old man, he muttered. He turned away from me and picked his beer back up. We'll talk when you calm down. Maybe after you get some sleep. You look like hell. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out. Not because I was giving up, not because I was scared, but because I needed to think. And because men like Ethan don't learn from words, they learn from consequences, I got into my truck and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. My whole body was shaking now, from rage, from disbelief, from exhaustion. I looked back at my house. The lights were on in every room. The music was still playing. I could see shadows moving past the windows. Ethan was standing in the doorway now, leaning against the frame, watching me with that same smug grin. He thought he'd won. He thought I was just some broken old man, too tired and too sad to fight back. He thought I'd drive away and never come back. That I'd find some motel or call a friend and just let him have what he wanted because it was easier than making a scene. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no idea that I'd spent 30 years working construction, that I'd built half the houses in this town with my own hands, that I'd raised a daughter by myself after my wife died and didn't let grief turn me into a doormat, that I'd buried my sister 3 hours ago, and the only thing keeping me upright was the promise I made her, that I'd take care of Cassie no matter what. And he had no idea that he was about to learn a lesson about respect, about boundaries, about what happens when you push a man too far. I started the engine, put the truck in reverse. And as I drove away, I made a promise to myself. Ethan wanted my house? Fine, let him think he had it.
Let him get comfortable. Let him spread out and settle in and think he'd won. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall. And I was about to make sure his fall was one he'd never forget. I drove to the only place I could think clearly, the lake. It was 20 minutes outside town, tucked behind a wall of pines so thick they swallowed the road whole and made you feel like you'd driven into another world. My father used to take me there when I was a boy, back when the world felt simpler and problems had solutions you could see coming. He'd sit on the dock with a thermos of coffee and a fishing rod he never actually used and tell me stories. Stories about men who thought they were untouchable, men who thought the rules didn't apply to them, men who learned the hard way that pride makes you blind, and blind men walk off cliffs.
I parked my truck by the water and turned off the engine, rolled down the windows. The air smelled like wet leaves and gasoline, and something older. Something that made me think of my father and my wife and all the people I'd lost who used to make sense of the world for me. My phone buzzed. I looked down. It was Cassie. Finally, I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment. Part of me didn't want to answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring and ring until she understood what it felt like to be ignored. But I answered. "Dad?" Her voice sounded small, nervous, like she knew she'd done something wrong but wasn't ready to admit it yet. "Where are you?" I asked. My voice came out flat. "Empty." "I'm at Ethan's friend's place. I heard you came by the house." "Your house?" I said. "Or mine?" There was a pause, a long one, then a sigh. The kind of sigh that means someone's about to say something they've been rehearsing. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Make what harder, Cassie?" I asked. "Coming home to strangers in my living room? Being told to sleep in a storage unit? Make that harder?" "Ethan didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, too quickly, like she'd been expecting this, like they'd talked about it. We didn't have anywhere else to go, and you got all that space. I thought you wouldn't mind." I closed my eyes, pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. "You thought I wouldn't mind," I repeated. "Yeah," she said. Her voice was defensive now. "You've been so distant lately, Dad, ever since Mum died, ever since Aunt Diane got sick. You barely answer my calls, you don't come to dinner when I invite you."
I didn't think you'd even notice we were there. That hurt. That hurt worse than anything Ethan had said. Worse than finding strangers in my house. Worse than being told to leave my own home. Because part of me, some small terrible part of me, wondered if she was right, if I'd been so buried in grief that I'd stopped being a father, if I'd let silence replace the conversations we used to have, if I'd let the weight of loss turn me into a ghost in my own life. "I notice," I said quietly. "I notice everything, Cassie." "Then why didn't you call me back last month?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "I left you 3 messages. I invited you to dinner twice. Why do I always have to be the one reaching out?" I didn't have an answer, not one that wouldn't sound like an excuse, not one that wouldn't make me sound exactly like what she thought I was.
A distant old man, too wrapped up in his own pain to see hers. "I'm sorry," I said finally. The words felt heavy, inadequate. "I should have been there more, I know that, but that doesn't give you the right to hand over my house to some guy I've never met. Doesn't give him the right to tell me to leave. He's not some guy," she snapped. He's my fiancé. We're getting married, Dad. And if you can't accept that, if you can't be happy for me, then maybe you don't need to be part of my life anymore." The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone. "My daughter." My little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms and make me read her the same bedtime story 5 times in a row. My daughter who cried on my shoulder when her mother died and told me she didn't know how to keep living without her. My daughter had just told me she was ready to cut me out of her life for a man who told me to sleep in a storage unit. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to Deserved Revenge channel, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone into the lake and watch it sink, to drive back to the house and drag Ethan out by his collar and make him understand what it meant to disrespect a man in his own home. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my glove box, pulled out a folder. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. The deed to my house, my will, my late wife's life insurance policy, bank statements, and something else. A letter from Diane, my sister. She'd written it 2 weeks before she died. I'd found it in her things after the funeral.
Tucked inside a Bible she used to keep on her nightstand. It was addressed to me in her shaky handwriting. I'd read it once, the day I found it, and then I'd put it away because I couldn't handle what it said. But now I unfolded it again, slowly, and I read, "William, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I need you to know something I should have told you years ago but didn't, because I thought I was protecting Cassie. I thought I was being kind. But kindness doesn't help when it lets someone walk into danger. Cassie came to see me last month. She asked me for money, a lot of it, $20,000. She said it was for an investment, something Ethan was working on, real estate or cryptocurrency or something that sounded too good to be true. I didn't ask questions, I just gave it to her. Because she's my niece and I love her and I wanted to help. But I did some digging after, because something about it didn't sit right with me. The way she wouldn't look me in the eye when she asked. The way she kept checking her phone like someone was watching her. I found court records, William. From 3 years ago, Ethan Pierce, fraud charges. He ran a scheme convincing people to invest in a fake company, took their money and disappeared. The charges were dismissed, but only barely. Only because he flipped on his partner and gave the prosecutors what they needed to go after someone bigger. He's using her. I know it. And I think deep down she knows it too, but won't admit it, because admitting it means admitting she made a mistake, and Cassie hates being wrong. Please, protect her, even if she doesn't want you to, even if she fights you, even if she tells you she hates you, because that's what fathers do. Diane. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands were shaking. Diane had known. She'd tried to warn me. And I'd been too wrapped up in watching her die to hear it. Ethan wasn't just some cocky kid with a gold watch and a smug smile. He was a con artist, a predator, and my daughter was his mark. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the glove box, and I started the engine. I wasn't going to a motel. I wasn't going to a friend's house. I wasn't going to some storage unit on Maple Street to sleep on a couch that smelled like mildew and regret. I was going to see a lawyer. And then I was going to take my house back. And if Ethan wanted a fight, he was about to get one. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and something else I couldn't quite place. Dust, maybe, or time. Gerald Moss had been practicing law in this town for 40 years. He'd handled my father's estate back when I was in my 20s and didn't understand what words like probate and executor meant. He'd drawn up my wife's will 3 months before she died, when we both knew the cancer wasn't going to let her see another Christmas. And now he was going to help me deal with this. He sat behind a desk that looked older than both of us combined, reading over the documents I'd brought. The deed to my house, Diane's letter, screenshots of text messages between me and Cassie. He read slowly,
methodically the way good lawyers do, like every word mattered, because it did. Finally, he set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "So your daughter gave this man keys to your house," he said. His voice was gravelly from 50 years of smoking cigars he'd supposedly quit a decade ago. "Without your permission?" "She thinks it's hers," I said. "Or maybe she just thinks I won't fight back." Gerald nodded slowly, steepled his fingers. "Do you have any proof she gave him the keys, a text message, an email, anything in writing?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the message Cassie had sent me earlier that morning, before I'd even gotten home from the funeral, before I'd had time to process that my sister was actually gone. The message was short, blunt. "Ethan's moving in, don't freak out, it's temporary, we'll talk later." Gerald read it twice, let out a long sigh. "That's not permission," he said. That's notification, big difference." "So I can kick him out?" I asked. Something in my chest loosened just slightly, a knot I didn't know I'd been carrying. "Legally, yes," Gerald said. He tapped the deed with one thick finger. "It's your house, your name on the deed. She has no legal authority to invite anyone to live there without your consent. You could call the police right now and have them removed for trespassing." I felt a flicker of relief, but it didn't last long. "What happens to Cassie?" I asked. Gerald's expression shifted, softened. He'd known Cassie since she was a little girl. He'd been at her baptism, her high school graduation. He'd sent flowers when her mother died. "That depends," he said carefully. "If she's living there too, you'd have to evict her formally, and that's complicated."
"She's your daughter. Courts don't like family evictions. It gets messy, expensive, and it destroys relationships." "I don't want to evict her," I said. The words came out harder than I meant them to. "I want her to wake up and see what this guy really is." Gerald leaned forward, studied my face. "Then you need leverage," he said. "Something that makes her question him on her own. Because if you just throw him out, she'll see you as the villain. She'll run to him, and you'll lose her completely." I thought about Diane's letter, about the fraud charges, about the $20,000 Ethan had taken from a dying woman. "What if I could prove he's lying to her?" I asked. "What if I could show her exactly who he is?" Gerald's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" I told him everything. About the letter Diane had left me.
About the court records she'd found, about the fraud case from 3 years ago, about how Ethan had convinced investors to put money into a fake real estate company and then disappeared with their life savings, about how he'd only avoided prison by flipping on his partner and giving prosecutors everything they needed to put someone else away. Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he tapped his pen against the desk. Once, twice, 3 times. "If you can get concrete evidence," he said slowly, "we can file for a restraining order, build a case for fraud, coercion, maybe even financial exploitation if he's taken money from her." "How do I get evidence, Bess?" I asked. "Court records are public, but they're old, and Diane's letter is just her word. I need something current. Something that proves he's running the same game now." Gerald smiled faintly. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 4 decades watching bad people make stupid mistakes. "You ever heard the phrase, 'give a man enough rope'?" he asked. I nodded. "Then let him keep thinking he's won," Gerald said. "Let him get comfortable. People like Ethan, they can't help themselves. They always push too far, they always get greedy, and when they do, they slip up." I left the office with a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And something was better than the nothing I had had when I walked in. I drove back to my house. The BMW was still in the driveway, the lights were still on, I could hear music again, louder this time. I could see shapes moving past the windows, shadows, strangers living in my space, touching my things, breathing my air. I sat in my truck for a moment and let the anger settle, let it harden into something colder, something sharper. Then I walked up to the door and knocked. The woman with the dark eyeliner answered. She looked me up and down, like I was selling something she didn't want. "Yeah?" she said. Her voice was flat, bored. "I need to talk to Ethan," I said. She smirked. "He's busy?" "Tell him it's important," I said. She rolled her eyes, but turned and yelled over her shoulder, "Ethan, old man's back!" A few seconds later, Ethan appeared. He had a beer in one hand and his phone in the other. He was wearing different clothes now, jeans that looked expensive, a shirt that probably cost more than my truck payment. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said. His smile was back. That smug, easy smile that made my fists clench. "Thought you'd be halfway to that storage unit by now." I stepped inside without asking, without waiting for permission. Ethan's smile faltered just slightly, just enough for me to notice. "I've been thinking," I said. My voice was calm, measured. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot." He tilted his head, suspicious. "Yeah?" "Yeah," I said. "You're right. You're marrying my daughter. That makes us family. And family should help each other out." He relaxed a little, set his beer down. "That's what I've been saying, man. That's exactly what I've been saying." "So here's what I'm thinking," I continued. "You need a place to stay. I've got space. But I need some help around here. Repairs, yard work, things I can't do myself anymore. Bad back. You know how it is. If you're still with me, you won't believe what happens next. Drop a comment below with your country so I know you're here." Ethan's smile widened. "You serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "But I need to know you're committed to Cassie, to this family, to making this work. So I want to sit down, talk, get to know you properly, man to man." He nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do that." "Good," I said. "Tomorrow night, just you and me. I'll make dinner. We'll talk, clear the air." "Sounds good," Ethan said. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then I shook it. His grip was weak, performative. The handshake of a man who'd never done a hard day's work in his life. As I walked back to my truck, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, wondering, trying to figure out if I was serious or if this was some kind of trap. He thought he'd just won again. Thought he'd played me, convinced the old man to roll over and accept the situation. What he didn't know was that I'd already started building the trap, and tomorrow night I was going to watch him walk right into it. I drove to the public library. It closed at 8, but I got there at 7:30. Sat down at one of the computers in the back where nobody could see my screen. And I started digging court records, public databases, social media. I found Ethan's Facebook page, his Instagram, his LinkedIn profile that claimed he was a cryptocurrency consultant and real estate investor, but listed no actual companies, no actual projects, just vague buzzwords strung together to sound impressive. I found his ex-girlfriend's Facebook page. She'd posted about him 2 years ago, long rants about how he'd borrowed money and never paid it back, about how he'd lied about where he worked, about how she'd finally kicked him out when she discovered he'd taken out credit cards in her name. The posts were still public, still there, still angry. I screenshotted everything. Then I kept digging. I found the court records Diane had mentioned, the fraud case from 3 years ago. It was all there, public record, Ethan Pierce and Marcus Riley. arrested for wire fraud and theft by deception. Marcus went to prison. Ethan walked away with probation and community service in exchange for his testimony. I found articles about the case, interviews with the victims, a retired teacher who'd lost her pension, a young couple who'd lost their down payment for a house, an elderly man who'd lost money he'd been saving to pay for his wife's medical bills. All of them trusted Ethan. All of them believed he was going to make them rich. And all of them lost everything. I printed it all, every page, every screenshot, every article, and I put it in a folder. By the time I left the library, it was almost 9. The sun had set, and the parking lot was empty except for my truck and one other car. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the folder. This was it. This was the ammunition I needed, but I couldn't just hand it to Cassie. She wouldn't believe me. She'd think I was trying to sabotage her relationship, that I was jealous or controlling or stuck in the past. No, I needed her to see it herself. I needed Ethan to reveal who he really was, and I needed to be patient enough to let him do it. I started the truck and drove to a motel on the edge of town, paid cash for a room. It smelled like cigarettes and bleach, but it had a bed and a lock on the door, and that was enough. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow night, Ethan was coming to dinner, and I was going to make sure it was a meal he'd never forget. Dinner was at 6. I spent the whole day preparing. Not just the food, everything. I cleaned the house, not because it was dirty, but because I needed Ethan to see that I took this seriously, that I wasn't some broken old man he could manipulate. I made a roast, potatoes, carrots, the same meal I used to make every Sunday when my wife was alive. She taught me how to cook it, how to season the meat just right, how to time everything so it all finished at the same moment. I set the table carefully, 2 plates, 2 glasses, cloth napkins I hadn't used since she died. A bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. This wasn't special in the way I'd imagined when I bought it, but it mattered. At 5:45, I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window, the BMW. Ethan got out wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He checked his phone, fixed his hair in the side mirror, then he walked up to my door. He didn't knock, just opened it and walked in like he owned the place. "Smells good," he said. His eyes swept over the table, the food, the whiskey. "Didn't know you could cook." "My wife taught me," I said, before she passed. He nodded, but didn't say anything. No condolences, no acknowledgement. Just sat down at the table and poured himself a drink without asking. We ate in silence for the first few minutes. I watched him, the way he chewed with his mouth open, the way he checked his phone every 30 seconds, the way he looked around my house like he was already planning how to redecorate it, how to sell it. "So," I said finally, "tell me about yourself." He shrugged, cut into his roast. "Not much to tell, man. Met Cassie about a year ago. Fell in love. Now we're here." "Where'd you meet?" I asked. "Online," he said. "Dating app. She was the first person I messaged. Crazy how that works out sometimes." "What do you do for work?" I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second, but I caught it. "Investments?" he said. "Cryptocurrency mostly. Some real estate on the side. Diversified portfolio." "Sounds unstable," I said. I kept my voice neutral. Curious, not accusatory. He laughed. "That's what people said about the internet in the 90s, about Amazon, about Bitcoin when it was $10. You gotta take risks if you want to win big." "Fair point," I said. "But the 90s are over, and most crypto guys I know are either millionaires or bankrupt. Which are you?" His smile tightened, just a little. "I'm doing fine." "Fine enough to help Cassie pay rent?" I asked. "Or is that why you're here, living in my house for free?" His jaw clenched. He set his fork down. "Look, William, I don't know what you're trying to prove here, but—" "I'm not trying to prove anything," I interrupted. My voice stayed calm, even. "I'm trying to understand, because my daughter's never needed help before. She's always been independent, strong. And now suddenly she's with a guy who can't hold down a steady job and thinks my house is a free crash pad." Ethan stood up. His chair scraped against the floor.
"I don't have to listen to this. Sit down," I said. I didn't raise my voice, didn't move, just looked at him. And something in my eyes made him pause. Slowly, he sat. I leaned forward, folded my hands on the table. "I know about the fraud charges," I said. His face went pale. All the color drained out of it in an instant. "I know you were investigated 3 years ago," I continued. "I know about Marcus Riley. I know you convinced people to invest in a fake real estate company. I know you took their money and disappeared. And I know the only reason you're not in prison right now is because you flipped on your partner to save yourself." Ethan's hands were shaking. He tried to hide it by picking up his glass. But I saw. That's not he. "I also know you borrowed $20,000 from my sister," I said.
2 weeks before she died, she wrote me a letter, told me everything, told me she was worried about Cassie, worried you were using her." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Cassie doesn't know," he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Know what?" I asked. "That you're a con artist, that you saw a grieving woman with a dying aunt and a father who wasn't paying attention and thought, easy target." "It's not like that," he said, but his voice cracked. "Then what is it like?" I asked. He didn't answer, just sat there staring at his plate. I stood up, walked to the counter, pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Inside was everything: the court records, the news articles, the screenshots from his ex-girlfriend's Facebook page, Diane's letter, bank statements showing the $20,000 he'd taken from her account 2 weeks before she died. I slid the folder across the table. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to leave. Tonight. You're going to pack your things. You're going to tell Cassie it didn't work out. And you're never going to contact her again." "And if I don't?" he asked. His voice was defiant, but his hands were still shaking. I smiled, not warmly, not kindly. The smile of a man who'd spent 30 years building houses in the Oklahoma heat and burying people he loved and learning that the world didn't care about your feelings. "Then I give this to the police, I said, "and to Cassie. And we see how long your engagement lasts when she knows the truth, when she knows you're the reason her aunt died broke. When she knows you've been lying to her since the day you met." Ethan stared at the folder like it was a bomb. Then he stood up, grabbed his coat. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "No," I said. "You made the mistake. You made it the second you thought you could walk into my house and take what's mine. I'm just cleaning up the mess." He walked out, slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I heard the BMW start, heard the engine rev on, heard the tires squeal as he peeled out of my driveway. And just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. I cleaned up the dishes, put the leftovers in the fridge, poured myself another whiskey and sat down in my wife's old recliner. The house was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in days, I could breathe. My phone rang. It was Cassie. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "What did you do?" she said. Her voice was shaking, angry, hurt. "I told him the truth," I said. You had no right to," she said. You had no right to." "I had every right," I interrupted. "I'm your father, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you get hurt by someone like him." "You don't know him," she said. "I know enough," I said. "I know he's lied to you. I know he's used you.
and I know you deserve better." She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. "I hate you," she whispered. And then she hung up. I sat there in the dark, holding my phone. My daughter hated me, but she was safe. And sometimes that's all a father can ask for. Cassie didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. I called, I texted, I left voicemails that went unanswered. I drove by her apartment twice, but her car wasn't there, and I didn't have the courage to knock.
I told myself I'd done the right thing, that she'd understand eventually, that time would prove I was trying to protect her. But every morning I woke up in an empty house and wondered if I'd just destroyed the only family I had left. Then one morning, she showed up. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard her car pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw her sitting in the driver's seat staring at the house. She sat there for a full 5 minutes, just staring, like she was trying to decide if she was really going to do this. Finally, she got out. She didn't knock, just walked in. Her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted. "You ran him off," she said. Not a question, an accusation. "I gave him a choice, but I said, and he made it." "What did you say to him?" she demanded. I set the coffee pot down and turned to face her. I told him the truth about the fraud charges, about the money he took from Aunt Diane, about the fact that he's been lying to you from the start. Her face crumpled. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "I'm your father." "You're a stranger," she shot back. Her voice broke. "You've been a stranger for 2 years. Ever since Mum died. Ever since Aunt Diane got sick. You stopped calling, you stopped showing up, and now you suddenly care?" I felt those words hit me like bullets, each one finding its mark because she was right. I had become a stranger. I'd let grief turn me into a ghost. I'd stopped being present, stopped being the father she needed. I'd convinced myself that giving her space was the same as respecting her independence. But really, I'd just been avoiding my own pain by avoiding her. "You're right," I said quietly. I haven't been there, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every call I didn't return, every dinner I skipped, every time I let silence fill the space where I should have been. But I'm here now, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you get hurt by someone like him. She shook her head. Tears streamed down her face. "He said he loved me." Her voice was so small, so broken. It reminded me of when she was 7 years old and her hamster died and she couldn't understand why things that you loved had to leave. "Maybe he did," I said gently, "in his own way. But love doesn't lie. And it doesn't steal. And it doesn't disappear the second someone asks hard questions." She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, put her head in her hands, her shoulders shook. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. I walked over and knelt beside her. My knees cracked, protested, but I didn't care. "You're not stupid," I said. You're human, and humans want to believe the best in people. That's not a flaw, sweetheart. That's hope. That's the part of you that came from your mother." She looked up at me. Her eyes were so much like her mother's, it hurt to look at them. "How do I move on from this?" she asked. "One day at a time," I said. "And you don't do it alone. Not anymore. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded slowly. And then, for the first time in 2 years, I hugged my daughter. Really hugged her. Not the stiff, obligatory hug you give at holidays,
but the kind of hug that says, I'm sorry and I love you and I'm here. She held on tight. And I realized how much I'd missed this, how much I'd missed her. We talked for hours that day. Really talked. Not the surface level conversations we'd been having for years, but real things, hard things. She told me about how she'd met Ethan, how he'd seemed so confident and sure of himself, and she'd been so lost after her mother died that she'd mistaken his certainty for strength. She told me about the money, how he'd convinced her to invest in his projects, how she'd given him $12,000 over the past 6 months, how he'd promised her it would double, triple, how it would set them up for the future, how she'd believed him because she wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than admitting she was alone. She told me about the fights they'd had, how he'd get angry when she asked questions, how he'd make her feel crazy for not trusting him, how he'd convinced her that her friends were jealous and her family didn't understand, and the only person who really cared about her was him. I listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, just listened. And when she finished, I told her about Diane's letter, about the court records, about the people Ethan had hurt before her. I'm reading and replying to every comment under this post, I said at one point, looking at my phone. People going through the same thing. It helps to know you're not alone. She read Diane's letter 3 times. By the 3rd time, she wasn't crying anymore. She was angry. I gave him everything, she said. He didn't deserve everything, I said, but he's gone now, and you're still here, and that's what matters. A month later, I got a call from Gerald. Ethan had been arrested. Turned out he'd tried the same scam on someone else, a woman in Tulsa, but she had a brother who was a lawyer and less patience than I did. They'd built a case, contacted his previous victims, and the prosecutor decided Ethan had violated his probation from the first fraud case. He was looking at 5 to 7 years. Cassie took the news quietly. She didn't celebrate, didn't feel vindicated, just nodded and said, "Good." She moved back in with me for a few months while she got back on her feet. We fell into a routine, coffee in the mornings, dinner together most nights. We didn't talk about Ethan much, but we talked about other things, her job, my health, the roof that needed fixing. We started going to the lake on Sundays. She'd bring a book, I'd bring my father's old fishing rod. We'd sit on the dock and exist in the same space without needing to fill it with words. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a tomb. It started feeling like a home again. She moved out eventually, got her own apartment, a better job, started seeing a therapist, started rebuilding. But she came by every week, sometimes twice. And every time she did, I made sure I was there, really there, not as a ghost, but as her father. I learned something through all of this. You can lose people without them dying. You can lose them to silence, to distance, to the walls you build around yourself, because grief feels safer than connection. And sometimes the hardest fight isn't against the stranger at your door, it's against the part of you that wants to stay buried. Ethan thought he could take my house, but what he really tried to take was my daughter. And that I would never allow. The moral here is simple. Protect what matters, not just your property, not just your pride, but the people you love, even when it's hard, even when they push you away, even when protecting them means they'll hate you for a while. Because family isn't about perfection. It's not about always getting it right. It's about showing up. It's about fighting for the people who matter, even when they don't think they need you to. It's about being willing to be the villain in someone else's story, if it means they get to be safe. My daughter forgave me, not because I was perfect, but because I was there. And in the end, that's all any of us can really do. Show up,
stay present, and refuse to let the people we love walk into danger alone. Tell me, have you ever had to fight for someone who didn't think they needed saving? What would you have done in my place? Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from, and if this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes love looks like confrontation and protection looks like boundaries, then subscribe. Because there are more stories like this. Stories about people who refuse to give up, who stand their ground, who prove that sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who've been knocked down by grief and loss and time, are the ones who hit the hardest when it matters most.